Hello everyone, welcome to this talk. I'm István Juhos from Circuit, and today I will be talking to you about some practical tips and tricks on how to improve your Compose previews. Let's get started. First of all, some food for thought. Some XML. I promise this will be the only XML you'll see in this talk, but we have to talk a bit about our history to appreciate the future, or the present actually. So there you can see a really simple XML layout. It's a layout of a list item, nothing really special. But what you can also see is that without any extra things that we had to do, we got a quite simple preview for it for free from Android Studio. Of course, we can do some manipulation on the preview itself with some tooling parameters, but pretty much that's it. We got this basically for free. So let's see what we have in Compose. We implement the same list item layout there in a composable. We set everything up as we'd like. And then we open the design panel in Android Studio, and what we can see is an error message, or more like a warning that you don't have any previews there. So what we have to do here is write some code to have a preview of a composable. Then, okay, let's write this really simple preview for our list item composable. Nothing special there. And Android Studio parses that preview code and renders it in an Android kind of window in the preview window inside Android Studio itself. Great, we have this, and the thing is, we had to do something to get a preview, and that something was writing code. Why this is important? Well, we write this code that will hopefully never reach production, but still we have to write code for it. Also, it will never reach production, hopefully. If you have R8 enabled, then and of course, if you don't use these preview functions anywhere else in your code, or anywhere actually, then R8, while doing its code shrinking magic, it will just get rid of all of your previews, and you don't actually have to worry about them. If you use them in your code base, that's another thing. But let's move forward. It's also code that not just us, but others will read and will depend upon for rendering the previews, of course. Also, this is code, so it needs to be maintained. So for example, we write a component, we write a preview for it, and then at some point in the development cycle, we need to alter the API of that composable, so probably we'll have to alter the preview as well. And the more complex the preview, the harder it is to modify, so yeah, you have to keep that in mind while implementing previews. Also, whatever we write in those previews, if someone new jumps on the project, they might have the urge to just copy and paste the same thing all over the project. Of course, you can filter this in code reviews, but it is a thing, and it takes time to get rid of those duplications as well. And of course, previews themselves might be used for other purposes than just, visualizing a composable by itself. Other purposes meaning communicating with designers. That's a really frequent use case, actually. Or building a component showcase if you're building a design system. Doing screenshot testing, prototyping a component, that's the actual real basic thing that you want to do with previews. So writing a preview isn't just, writing some code and just slapping a composable there and be done with it. You have to have some considerations happening. Okay, in the rest of the talk, we'll be talking about these points, some developer experience issues and how we can circumvent them by jumping through the annotation limitations, and to add some custom tooling to also do all of the above and deal with them. Also, some symbolism here that you will see throughout the talk is where you see the Jetpack Compose logo. That means that something is available with Jetpack Compose, and of course, its tooling is Android Studio, so in Android Studio. We'll be talking a bit about Compose multi-platform itself, and of course, the recommended tooling for Compose multi-platform is the still in development preview stage fleet. So when you see the two symbols on the top, we will be talking about Jetpack Compose and Compose multi-platform. Okay, let's see the first tip that we actually want to cover. If you're sensitive, the next slide is a bit lighter than this one, so just cover your eyes for a few seconds. Okay, so I told you, sorry for that, but we'll get rid of it in a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's say one developer gets the task to implement that list item composable, or any composable, but we'll stick with this list item. And that developer actually is a fan of light themes, so they use the light theme in their Android Studio instance. They write their code, and of course, they are aware of performance impacts of overdraws, so they don't add a background to this composable. As you can see, there is no background specification in that row of the composable, because a list item will be used inside another container, like a column or a lazy column or anything else, but we don't want these items to overdraw on the background. We just want the content to be displayed. So the developer does a great job, and they also add a preview for the list item, which looks really great in the light theme, actually. So the developer says that, okay, I'm done. I'll push this code into the to repo. Other developers in the team will review it, and it will pass. And then comes a new developer who is a fan of the dark mode, or the dark themes in Android Studio. So let's switch to the dark theme then, and see how that preview looks like in the dark theme of Android Studio. Do you see it? I surely have a hard time doing it. But yeah, so the developer experience of this is not really good. And of course, this is just a simple list item, and it's quite hard to see and quite hard to get around. And imagine this as a whole screen with different states and different parts, and you'll just have to go through it, and it's not a good developer experience to have this. So what we can do is start using parameters of the preview annotation itself. The first thing we want to do to have a better developer experience of this preview is to add the show background equals true setting to our preview, and with that, we'll just get a predefined background color rendered behind our composable and behind our preview, and yeah, it looks much better. It's worth noting that whatever we do with the preview parameters in the preview annotation has an effect on the preview tooling, but if you actually run the preview composable on a device or an emulator, which you can do, then these settings added to or set on the preview annotation doesn't take effect. So we can just go wild. Okay, that's one of the annotation parameters we have on preview, but let's see what else we can do here. Okay, so back to our little preview. And actually, we have control over what color is drawn behind as a background of our composables. The thing is, as preview is an annotation, and annotations are interpreted or processed by tooling, by Android Studio itself and the Compose toolchain and whatnot. These things that we set here have to be compile time constants. For the background color, that means that we have to add a literal there or another compile time constant. We will see an example of that. But I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time processing or interpreting that color there. I really don't know what color that would be if I just looked at it. So there are a couple of ways that we can mitigate this issue. First is a really basic one, adding a comment that, hey, this is that color from our color system. That's not so sophisticated, but it actually works. I've seen a couple of projects just doing this. Of course, if something changes in our color system, we have to go through all of our previews to change that one constant. It's obviously not a great experience. Also, what we can do is to have the predefined constants, which most Compose projects should already be having, because our theming pretty much requires such things. I mean, we can omit them, but it's easier to have them than not. So we can just reference one of our built-in colors or one of the colors from our semantic color system maybe, and just have them referenced here. That's a much better alternative. So next, what we want to see is we want to add a dark mode preview as well to our composable. We want to see how it looks in dark mode. We can easily do that by adding by setting the UI mode parameter to configuration.UI mode NIDS. And what we see is that, okay, our component actually changed the dark mode, and in our design system, the dark mode text color is white, but the background didn't change because the tooling doesn't know that we wanted dark mode. And dark mode preview doesn't know that what has to be done in dark mode preview, and that constant in the background color is, remain the same. So we get this. What we can do here is that to actually add another preview here, which we configure for dark mode. We change that background color to something else, like dark gray W500, and we add the UI mode NIDS to that new preview, and what we'll get is the proper light and dark mode previews. Nice. We added some more code. As you can see, our previews are growing and growing. We'll see how we can mitigate that as well. So first checkpoint, the great thing is that this, of course, works in Unreal Studio, works in Jetpack Compose. The preview annotation is there, and there are a lot of parameters on it. But the sad thing is that the Compose multi-platform variant of the preview annotation doesn't support any parameters. And of course, Fleet doesn't support it either. Hopefully, this will change in the future. Okay, next up, group your previews. Again, this is a developer experience thing. Let's see what grouping means for previews. We're back at our pretty little preview function, and let's add two other annotations to it, two other previews. And as you can see, these previews are named and grouped. The name tells Unreal Studio to render a string, that string there, as the name of the previews that it will render in the preview window. And group tells Unreal Studio to group those together to have a filter option. We will see how that looks like. So on the previous slide, we've seen the primary background variants of these previews, and we could add two new previews there for the secondary background. If we want to have these different want to render our composables on different backgrounds to see how they look in certain situations, we can do that. And now we have 4 preview annotations on our preview, and we get 4 different previews rendered in the tooling window with their own name. And actually, we get these filter options there, the grouping options. So if you have a lot of previews like this, hopefully not this way, we'll see a better way to do it. But if you have a lot of previews and they are grouped, and you can actually filter them or which one to display in the preview window. So that's another great thing to think about. And how we can mitigate creating tons of previews all over the place in our project, we can create multi-previews. This is kind of a new feature, not that new anymore, of course, but it's a really enjoyable thing to have. Back to our example, we have 4 previews on this preview, these are, and we can group them together. We can annotate another annotation plus with these previews to have more fine-grained control over which previews are displayed in our preview implementations. So this one is for the primary background color ones called preview primary background. We can have another one called preview secondary background for the secondary backgrounds. And now our 4 annotations become 2 annotations. And the tooling can pick it up, of course, and render the same 4 previews for us. The great thing about this is that these annotations can live somewhere in the public space of your application project. And And you can tell your developers that these are the preview annotations that we are using. Use those everywhere. And if something needs to change or we need to add some more more preview configurations to them, we can do that easily. And all over the project, this new update will be applied. The funny thing is that even these multi-preview annotations can be used as annotations on another multi-preview annotation. So we can even group these together to have only one of these super preview annotations. Again, great thing if you want to handle preview configuration in your project at one place. This is a more recent thing than multi-preview annotations themselves. The Jetpack Compose tooling actually comes with these multi-preview template annotations, which do pretty much the same as we would do, and as their name suggests. The first one here is preview light dark, which does basically the same thing that we've done manually without setting the background. So this is not really developer friendly, or well, not really dark mode IDE friendly, but it's there. Also, of course, these are open source. These are part of the Compose tooling project, so you can just go in and take some inspiration from these on how to implement these kind of previews. Great. There is a preview font scale annotation here, which gives us a lot of different predefined font scale previews there. Of course, again, no background here, so again, sensitive people, close your eyes for a bit. We'll switch to light mode to get a better grasp on this. And as you can see, we just get a couple of previews with different font sizes predefined. It's kind of similar with the screen sizes. We get a couple of different device screens that we can preview our components on. If you're building for multiple form factors like desktop, landscape, portrait phones, tablets, unfolded foldables, or whatnot, you can get an inspiration from this annotation or just use this directly to have a lot of these kind of previews pre-baked. Also, if you're doing dynamic colors, which is a pretty young feature on Android anyway, then there is a preview template for that as well. But yeah, I was lazy to set that up, so yeah, do your homework and see that in the documentation. It's actually quite difficult to set it up. It involves a lot of moving pieces and defining colors and whatnot. So yeah, but we have a preview for that, a preview annotation for that as well. Again, great thing. This all works in Jetpack Compose and Android Studio. And just as before, there is no support for multi-preview annotations in Compose multi-platform and Fleet, and of course those template annotations aren't there either. But we can get over that as well by building custom tools. We'll see how that will make sense in a minute. There's a new example. We let go of our little list item, and this is a button, but we wouldn't know until we actually built a preview for it. Of course, if you skim through the code, you would know because it's basic, but imagine it was a large screen and you can't just go through it with different states and whatnot. You can just parse it with your eyes themselves, but there's a preview for that. So this preview is built with the preview light dark and multi-preview annotation. And yeah, we just call the primary button there. We want to preview that. And with this, we get this. It's preview light dark, but something's not there. Can you spot what's not there? The theme. Yeah, so how many of you forget to add the theme in your previews all the time? Yeah, that's kind of expected. It's a thing that you have to do every time if you want the correct previews to be there. Of course, if your components are using your themes, composition locals, and so on and so forth, so that they are initialized. But that's a thing that actually most of us are missing, and it's the theme. By adding it, of course, we get the light and dark previews as usual. But there is another thing missing here from this preview, and that is flexibility in Compose multi-platform. So preview light dark, it doesn't exist in Compose multi-platform as we've seen before, and also we can do anything in this preview, can customize it, even if we just added the normal preview annotation instead of the preview light dark. But that's what we're talking about here, some customization options. So what if we've built something just for our previews, just to be used inside our preview composables? So yeah, that's some tooling. Why shouldn't we do that? It can be reused, it can be distributed all over the code base and whatnot. So that is something I love to call a preview box. Could call it anyway, but yeah, it will be basically just a box that can be used inside or should be used inside our previews, and it will give us some more flexibility than just handling the annotations themselves. So let's build this preview box. Simple composable, nothing special here. There is the modifier, there is the content. We call the content inside the app theme, and yay, we solved forgetting one line with several lines. No? If we just wanted to do this, this wouldn't be worth it. Kind of, right? So let's do more with this. Let's add a box there, because we're building a box. It makes sense to have an inner box there. And we've been talking a lot about backgrounds, so let's start building the parameter list that will be passed down to the inner box with a background color. And for that background color, yeah, we just pass it down, of course, to the box through a modifier there, and it will hopefully display a background around our content composable. But what we want to do here is we want to get rid of that constant limitation of the preview annotation. So we want to add dynamic colors here maybe. We want the background to change depending on which theme we are in, for example, or which configuration we are adding to our previews. To do that, we, for example, can read colors from our theme, like usual. And of course, that would be nice. But depending on our theme setup, this might not be the exactly correct way to do this. Let's have a quick insight on how themes are usually built with Compose. We have this accessor here, and that accessor is usually an object where we expose composition locals stored somewhere in our project. And those are composable things, of course. And when we define our composition locals, we have a couple of options to set them up. So what you can do here is, for example, throw an error if the composition local isn't initialized yet, and you initialize it in your theme composable, and then it will have a default value. This is kind of useful when you're building design systems, and you only want your design system components to properly work inside that design system's theme composable. So doing this actually makes a lot of sense if you're thinking in a design system, for example. Or you can be a good citizen and you can add a default value there. This is what Notarial actually does. So if we go back to our example, the issue here is actually that the default parameter list is resolved before the app theme composable is actually called. So that read from the colors composition local happens before it actually gets initialized. So that's why we could get different results than what we're expecting. The fix is quite easy. We have to defer the reading of that composition local and just call that deferred composable lambda for the background parameter. And with this, we got a button which has a background with our preview box. Of course, we can continue extending this tool with, for example, padding values. And basically anything that we can set on a box, we can just expose in the API surface of this preview box, and yeah, we can continue having fun. Why this is good, you might ask? Well, again, with the background, we can see how our components would look in different situations. On on the primary background, on the main screen of our app, or on a secondary background, on a dialogue, and so on and so forth. Okay, of course, if we can do preview box, we can do preview column as well. The box is designed to hold one or more components, of course, but they will be rendered on top of each other. But if we want to add multiple things inside our inside a preview to preview them, we can create a column and just list those composables and have them rendered right below each other. That kind of achieves the same effect that than what you expect from multiple previews having been rendered in the preview pane. So I'll show you what we can do with its preview column in this new part, where we will override compositional locals just in the previews themselves. So let's say that in the preview column, we want to list multiple things in the content. That's what it's designed for. But we want this preview column to be able to, well, change the layout direction. We want to have control over the layout direction. That makes sense because if you want your app to be accessible for right-to-left reading people, right-to-left countries, this is basically a thing that you have to design your components for by default. Simpler components like a button or the list item we've seen before usually doesn't require too much thinking, but more complex components and animations and so on and so forth might. Okay, so of course, if we know what compositional locals we want to override, we can just override them by adding a new compositional local provider, setting the value of that compositional local there, and the rest is the same as in the preview box. We just call the app theme, call a column, parameterize it, and call the content inside it. Okay, how the call site looks like for preview column, we add a primary button and a list item there, so it looks like this, and if we set the layout direction to right to left, we'll instantly get this. The great thing about this is that it still works in Jetpack Compose, of course, even with the dark light preview annotation. But the other great thing is that if we don't use the multi-preview annotations there, this tooling actually works in Compose multi-platform as well with the compositional local overrides and everything. Okay, we're kind of ending this talk, kind of at the end, but I have some more ideas that I just couldn't fit into this talk properly. But I can elaborate a bit on those because while I was researching this talk, there were a lot of interesting ideas that I stumbled upon. So first of all, in the Compose, in the preview window, sorry, there are a lot of options for our composables. There are a lot of buttons there if you hover over those composables. You can, of course, run your composables on a device or an emulator, and then they basically become first interactable, and you can see the actual rendering on the device. So that's nice. There is also an animation preview, an accessibility preview there. So if you can use your previews to do preliminary accessibility checks. That's a quite recent feature in Android Studio, but it gives you a report of your accessibility issues, if there are any. And you can do this component by component preview. And if you write previews for screens, you can do whole screens as well. So that's nice. Obviously, this kind of intervenes with the job of designers, but you can work together with the designer if you spot some issues in your composables or in your design system, and you can tell your designer that, hey, this doesn't check out. Okay, I've stumbled upon an article that had this idea of providing composables as preview parameters. So there is this annotation called preview parameter provider. You can actually, it's a class. You can create preview parameter providers, push data in there, and it will generate composables, generate previews for you based on those sets of data. And there was an idea. I put the link to that article in the resources section that manages to actually inject composables themselves in previews as preview parameters. So you can just list your composables and it will just inject it and create new previews with those composables. That's awesome. Also, there is this library called Showcase. So you could build a preview a component preview app or preview component project with your previews. Sorry, component project with previews. But you can also do your own thing. You can use your preview composables as part of your own component showcase if you're doing a design system. But be aware that, as we already said, R8 will strip away your previews if you don't use them in production code or if you don't use them anywhere. If you're building the showcase, then those composables will be used, not with Showcase itself, the library, but if you're building your own. And of course, quite recent development in the first-party support department, previews can be used for screenshot testing. But if you do use them for screenshot testing, currently with the current tooling, you have to put them in a different source set so they won't be around your actual composable implementations. But all in all, go wild with the tooling because the more code you can reuse and the more generalization you can do, the better will your code base be and the less littered will it be with all those preview parameters lying all around, preview annotations lying all around. So wrapping up, we touched quite a few things here. And you might have this question lingering around, does it worth the effort to deal with previews that much? And the answer, as always, is it depends. If you take your time and if you have that time to do a proper preview tooling in your project, then new joiners will have a much easier time to adapt to your project and see your composables quickly and get rendered and see how they look and find them when they have to modify them, for example. On the other hand, it takes time and effort. So if you don't have the time and effort, just be sure to have previews for all of your components however you can. You can at least do the multi-preview thing and just share that annotation everywhere. Okay, here are some resources I used for this talk. The last actual link is the one that I mentioned that has an idea of providing composables through the preview parameters. So check that out. That's really nice. The rest is just documentation. So what I'd like you to take away from this talk is that, compose previews are code. You need to work with it. You need to maintain it. And try to be as simple as possible with them and try to think of with other developers in mind how they will see it, why they will see it, and how you can help others to make sense of your composables. And if you have the time and resources, just create custom tools all over that can be shared and can be more flexible than the annotations itself. With that, thank you very much for being here, and I'll be around.